This is Aunt Clara's little sewing nook. Right now, it's looking a bit empty, but only because her sewing machine isn't in place yet. She spends hours in this spot, stitching, quilting, sorting through her patterns. That basket on the floor, it's overflowing with ideas. First, I'm starting with her machine. Here's the design I worked up in Silhouette Studio. It's actually based on my grandmother's sewing machine, the same one I learned to sew on. Since I build most of my miniatures in 1/16 scale, I wanted to cut it with my machine to capture all the tiny details. I glued several layers of cardstock together, enough to get the thickness that felt right for this miniature scale. I'm sanding down all of the hard edges to make the shape feel more rounded, like a real sewing machine would be. I mixed up a paint color that's pretty close to my grandmother's machine, kind of a soft taupe. It's one of those gray-brown colors that doesn't sound exciting, but it has that perfect vintage feel. I added a bit of cream as an accent on top of the machine as well, just like hers had. Aunt Clara believes good sewing always starts with good lighting and at least 3 snacks within reach. Next, I'm gluing on the stitch type and the stitch width labels. I designed these in Silhouette Studio too, because there's no way I could ever paint something that tiny by hand. This just gives the machine that extra bit of realism. Aunt Clara says she only ever uses 2 stitch settings anyway, but she likes to feel like she has options. Here's a close-up of how it looks so far. Now I'm adding the tension guide and stitch width knobs. Just tiny bits I cut from a cake pop stick and a Q-tip. I also made a hand wheel and the base for the machine, which really brings the whole thing together, I think. I did realize I painted the throat plate in the wrong spot. Also, I should have painted the entire base first, then added the throat plate. That would have made things a lot easier, but I think it's still going to look okay in the end. I probably could have used an eye pen to create all of the little thread guides, but I ended up bending them myself out of wire. I also glued a toothpick into the base of the machine to give it a sturdy post so it could attach cleanly to the base. I can just see her now, perched at her little machine, stitching something colorful while the afternoon light comes through the window. Once the machine was glued to its base, I gave it a coat of diamond glaze to give it that smooth enamel finish. And of course, no sewing machine is complete without a spool of thread. So I made one and threaded it through all of the loops. That was a fiddly little task, but totally worth it. I'm honestly so pleased with how this little machine turned out. If my grandmother were still here, I think she'd be amazed. Now I'm starting on the sewing cabinet. It's one of those clever vintage styles where the machine can be tucked away inside when not in use. You can make this from layers of cardstock, food packaging, or even a thin wood that's around 1/16 of an inch thick. Whatever you have on hand. I'm just cutting out all of the main pieces here to get everything ready. All of the measurements for the cabinet will be in the video description if you'd like to make one too. To add a bit of realism, I used a small ball stylus to create lines that look like the folding flaps on either side, the kind that would swing in and tuck away when the machine isn't being used. These are the side pieces for the drawer section. This one here has the curved cutout. It goes on the opposite end of the cabinet. And here are the 3 little drawer shelves. The back piece has the shelf placement already marked, which makes it a lot easier. I start by gluing one of the side pieces onto the top edge of the back panel. Then, using the placement marks I made earlier, I glue each of the drawer shelves into place, attaching them to the back and the side. Once all the drawer shelves are in, I glue the remaining side panel to close it up. It ends up looking like this. Then I sand the back corners of the drawer unit just to soften those sharp edges and make everything feel a bit more finished. Aunt Clara keeps buttons in one, buys tape in another, and the bottom drawer is always a mystery. I bet it's chocolates. I marked on the back of the cabinet top where the scored line is, that's for the fake fold-in section. Then I gave myself about a 1/16 of an inch lip at the back, just as a guide for where to glue the drawer unit in place. It helps everything line up nice and straight. I did the same thing with the curved side piece on the opposite end, gluing it right up against the score line on the top, and again leaving that 1/16 of an inch lip at the back. Just to make it a little sturdier, I glued a small brace between the curved end and the drawer unit. It really helps keep everything solid. It's really starting to look like a vintage sewing cabinet now. I'm so happy with how it's coming together. I made another piece that's a lot like the brace, but this one's just to close off the space between the drawer unit and the end panel. If this were a real cabinet, that piece would help hide the sewing machine when it's tucked away inside. I added the same piece on the back too. I'm using some wood color swatches I made in a previous video to help me decide what finish I want to use. My grandmother's cabinet was a dark wood, almost a walnut really, but I don't want to go quite that dark with this one. I'm leaning towards something a little softer, still vintage, but not too heavy. First I base coated the entire cabinet in a light yellow, then gave it a wash of brown, and also trying to keep my brush strokes going in the direction I imagined the wood grain would run. I feel like Aunt Clara would have picked this color herself. I forgot to press play while I was making the drawers, so here's what I did. I glued the long sides on top of the drawer base and then added the ends in between. With the drawers slid into the unit, I glued the drawer fronts on, keeping the bottom edge lined up with the drawer shelf. I did have to sand a little to make some small adjustments. Making drawers is always a bit fiddly. And the hardware is just the right size for Aunt Clara's little paws. I'm placing the sewing cabinet right here in front of the window. Everything fits just right. In the bottom drawer, I tucked away her little chocolate stash. Aunt Clara has a bit of a sweet tooth. This drawer holds some of her button cards. She's been collecting buttons for years. As a matter of fact, somewhere around here she has a tin that's just full of all kinds of buttons. And this is her sewing basket, packed full of all the little tools and notions that she might need, the kind that she can just carry with her from room to room. I'm a bit envious. I've always wanted a sewing basket just like hers. I added her favorite pair of scissors. They're small, but they're really sharp. She's had them for years. There's a spool of ribbon she's been saving. She says it's too pretty to use on just anything. And some vintage thread on a wooden spool, the kind you just can't find anymore. She has several bolts of fabric stacked neatly under her machine, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are more hidden around the room. And of course she has a large collection of patterns, all designed for humans naturally, but she makes them work, just a few clever alterations for a touch of wiggle room in the back. This is her favorite sewing chair, super comfy and just the right amount of back support. She says she can sew for hours in it. It tucks in perfectly when not in use, assuming she hasn't left a stack of half-mended clothes on it again. It looks like Aunt Clara has her next sewing project all planned out. She's even picked out the buttons already. And that thread, she must be planning to do some decorative stitching. And here's her trusty tape measure. So now her little sewing nook is all ready, just waiting for Aunt Clara to come in and get to work. Everything's in place, her machine, her fabric, her favorite scissors. All that's missing is Aunt Clara herself. If you hadn't guessed already, Aunt Clara is a mouse, but I have a feeling you figured that out by now. Unfortunately, Aunt Clara's running a little bit late, so you won't get to meet her today. But don't worry, she's on her way. You'll get to meet her soon. I can just see her now, sitting in her tiny sewing chair, stitching away. She only exists in my mind for now, but I've been thinking about her a lot. And honestly, I'm just as excited as you are to finally meet her. I can't wait to show you more of Aunt Clara's world. There's still so much more to make. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.